spleen. 5. 212. But God, if I could just scatter a few drops of this berry in the air I breathe, in this crushing season, would the strangling cease? Or that dillard there? Like any novice, if I could swing above the shoulders of the good people, the smoking censers of her books, would it be bearable? Or very able? Poor James, very poor. I know it. But God, the dead weight of the worthy, we the people, decent and estimable, everybody's eyes on the big board, starting out of their sockets, spreading ourselves around, stocking up in securities for safety's sake. Who is it today? Dillard? No, she's down. Berry? Kinda flat but steady. Nemiroff? Grab him if the market begins to slide. Secure. Sound on a long-term basis. And the iambic lasts and is negotiable. Transferable always in London. Yep, here you are, Jack. Right back down where you started. Can't get away from 'em. Lighting up every dark alley with the names on the marquee. Approval, security, status, the toxins you tried to escape 20 years ago in another life, popping up like ratsbane in the holler at your back door. 'Cause that's not all, Jack. Jack'd like a little success too, wouldn't he, Jack? No matter which field you choose, man, it all smells the same. It's the same rank-feeted soil, the same old country, man, and the same countrymen. Reading Ceylon, 213. Molto grav e sostenuto. Schwarze Milch der Frühe vertrinken sie abends. Black milk of daybreak, we drink you in the evening. We're shoveling a grave in the air, plenty wide. You'll rest easy. Remembering the coal town, Bristol, 1943, and the iron town, Birmingham, 1960. It was in transit I felt them, between room and dream, fear and something general as the weather, underlying all these. Now the locomotives plying State Street, in the center, vacant after dark, were my first messengers from this. So I heard them again on South Side, the train's cries and the ubiquitous hum of the rails on the flats that carried a signal of connection, vibration, continuity, warning, and of mourning repeated, conveyed by a voice with a melody and a sorrow that was ceaseless. Between the low parallel ridges and downward, held over, at labor in the shallow hard basin of cement and ore, across some threshold within me, down from the ear into the body, the sound into vibrations, the thought into fear. As they receded toward the Gulf, from the second heard messages to the first, through the echoes, which were endless, dispersed everywhere. Wir trinken und thinking, no louder than the sound before, than the thought of the sound before. On the crumbling facades downtown, on the windowless north wall of the psychiatric wing, repeated in the memory that is their resonance. In the wide parks I felt them, like an undercurrent deep in wires, wondering, was it my thought of them, or the beat of my heart, or their echoes on the bare surfaces, the vibrations of the trains moving under us, or from elsewhere, from the chimney's red fires over Bessemer on the horizon of the city, Ypres, Dresden, Nagasaki, Buchenwald, Belsen, Birkenau, the scorched and tangled neurons in the brain of my father, or the remote sanctuary of the small church 8 blocks away, from the time to come, from all of these together, from everywhere, continuous and ceaseless. Sostenuto, molto grave. Wir schaffen ein Grab in den Lüften, da liegt man nicht in. On the Stranger's Supra, 214. Le devenir des êtres est une offrande. Becoming is the gift and the sacrifice of those who are. Dear Simone, how do I get the words down at last? Set them down on that basis. Lay them down with you and with them, if nothing in sight bears them out. How fine the floor they move on, passionate, streaming, transitive, under the vision. (214) Night. And our friendly cross-examiner for the prosecution. Mike, what made you attempt to embed in your work these hidden persuaders, to coax it out of you, compel you to push on, and believe you could? Through the doubt and tedium, the squalor and guilt and fear of oblivion, toward the moment of awakening beyond death in the lives of others. Pine Knots, 216. All morning trying to convince B she should apply for the NEA grant. Well, I'd have to tell him about my disability. I might just jump up and down. Then, on second thought, with a doubtful grin, part fun, part apprehension, maybe they'd feel like I cheated them. As if the match of a thought, flickering with both, were struck in the dark behind her eyes, and the creases which net them in could be erased, smoothed with the back of her hand, as she sweeps back her hair and goes off into a memory. When I was in the house with the pine knots, waiting for my daddy to come in from Glade, the walls of this house were sawmill pine with red knots in them, and toward the west, when the late sun come in, the weather side, some paper which my mother pasted there had curled down from the rain, washing out the flour. Some days, when I was alone in the house, with my mother out at work, washing, my daddy gone to Glade, and Flo in school, I'd sit there by myself and look at the sun glowing through these red whorls, through the cracks in the knots. The tiniest sunbeams would poke through like straight pins, darting gleams on the wall behind me. They were so colorful. They turned pink, red, purple, laid on with the sun behind the vineyard ridge. And behind me, where the light hit, spreading the floating pinpoints, there was this picture in color. My mother tore it out of a catalog and glued it to the wall with flower paste. It was an old kangaroo sitting alone in a clearing with dead stumps and a few dead fallen trees, maybe in Africa. Fallen, you know, not failed, ragged, broke off wild-like. I used to look at that picture and imagine myself in it, with the clearing and the forest all around. Then, one day, I was in it, in the stomach or the pouch of it. Even though nobody had ever told me kangaroos had pouches, I was inside it. I couldn't see nothing, and it was oozy in there, and the kangaroo was hopping. I didn't know they hopped, but it was hopping over some logs. Then I was spilt out onto the floor, outside it, looking up at it again. I liked to look at pictures that were spacious. It got so I could look into them. I could lose myself in them, and things would happen. But there was something scary about it, too, because I'd get sucked into them all at once before I knowed it, like when the kangaroo took me up into its greasy stomach pouch and hopped me over the dead logs. But even this helped me. Being scary-like made it easier to get in. I don't know why. Till finally I didn't have to look at pictures. I'd study the moon, the clouds. I'd look at the rainbow with all the space around it. Then I'd be on it. I'd be at the top of the rainbow, like on a sliding board, and at the bottom end of it, down where I was sliding, there'd be this giant, and the colors would be going into his mouth, where the pot of gold was. They'd all be gliding down, down, down to where he'd be gobbling them in, gobbling and getting ready for me. Then whoa, right before I got into his mouth, this funny little green man, I couldn't explain him. I didn't know where he come from, this little feller. He just appeared, like, out of nowhere, and stick a pair of wings on my back, and there I'd go, up to the top again. I'd feel myself up there, again, hovering like, on wings, and the space, the drop off, the height of it. But if I kept on looking, I'd start sliding, down, down. It got so I could repeat this, without the rainbow. It'd come to me on its own, but I'd practice it till I got so I could call it back, the space of it. I'd study it, you see, like I'd done my clay. These weren't dreams, but they were like dreams. Daydreams, you know, how they'll pop into mind. But it got to where I could have it when I wanted to, make myself get up there, if there was a cloud or something to focus on. Like thunder clouds crossing the mountains with the sun on them, when it left the holler, and that was the only place the sun was. I'd be up there, slithering down them, getting to the peak of them, and sliding down, gliding down, coasting down, in space. Got to where I could call it up even inside, when I was alone. It was a comfort if I didn't have nothing else to do. Or in the winter time, after we'd come back from sledding, me and Flo, from hauling the wood in, with the red knots glowing like coals in the planks, and the wind blowing in from the mountains, and my daddy back again, trailing in from town, around the hill, behind the house, home. In the human condition, to Alex, 2:16. Alle wirklich Leben ist Begegnung. Buber. Son, you won't believe this, but there's news here at last, and one more set of tracks winds up through the woods. For somebody's followed me home from the forests old, a lady grave and gentle, poised, of noble bearing, with staying power, and with a knack for surviving, well, God knows what. What's left of her hair is plastered with motor oil. She's more than half blind, and she can barely walk. But she keeps coming on like a queen, serenely, commanding confidence in you and in herself. So I've named her Hannah, after Hannah Arendt, whom I met once briefly in an elevator, not long before her death. She was alone inside, as was I, peering in, with my thumb on the down button. I was pressing down hard. The friend I was visiting had forgotten his umbrella and returned for it, backwards, retreating warily into his apartment, eyeing my hand over his shoulder, fixing it with solemn fervor, and one final admonition. Whatever you do, Mike, don't let that elevator go down. Don't let it pass. Fred nodded devoutly with a keen look, nailing my thumb to that down button. So I nodded back a doer okay in my best Presbyterian fashion. Sure enough, as soon as he disappeared, the blue light came on, above the two doors which parted, sliding back into their recesses. I made a sudden stab and grappled the rubber edge. It kicked back, quivering skittishly in its niche, chafing and fidgeting as cranky old elevators do. This one was mulish and arthritic, with a touch of epilepsy. The person it contained was quite different. She wore a faded shawl. A drab dress fell from her shoulders, revealing no outline. She seemed out of place, abstracted. She might have been a noblewoman, a dowdy Latvian princess from another era. She might almost have been a cleaning woman, fresh off the boat and Ellis Island, from Warsaw or Vilna. Almost, but for the eyes, which held my gaze very level, though not without kindness, and a trace of amusement too, perhaps. But because it didn't change, her look seemed to probe our deadlock, to put it to the test, to ponder it even with emphasis, this seam in our threshold, this febrile, many-storied flaw, rubber buffered but bottomless as the seconds passed. By saying nothing, by doing nothing, to say, I'm waiting. That week there'd been a murder in the lobby next door, a rape and a woman savagely beaten down the street. 3 separate incidents in 5 days, one in an elevator. Investigations were continuing, with no arrests. Now I was a stranger to that elevator. I'd never stood there before, and would never again. With my thumb glued grimly to the button, out of her sight, my ragged sweatshirt tilting off balance into it, and my shaggy bent neck trembling with tiny uncontrollable spasms as the convulsive tick of the machine erupted through me. I dominated her close little kammer, crouched in its access. She had nowhere else to look, and she would look nowhere else. So there she stood in her makeshift cell, captivated by its unkempt, part-beatnik keeper, a long-maned yokel with a tick, stubble-bearded, slack-jawed, a country boy, born and bred in the face of a civilization and a city embattled. I seemed to see her still at bay, my quarry, inside the trembling cell which I hold with my hand. Mother Courage of the weathered countenance, compact, strong-boned, with iron-gray hair, under a worn silk shawl, looking me full in the face for 2 minutes without fear. Come on, Fred. Come on, boy. Come on. Come on. Fred? Fred! Where's Fred? Fred, you bastard, Fred. Fred, it wasn't the umbrella. Fred, you're combing your beard. You're taking a leak. Fred? You've left me, Fred. Oh, God. I am abandoned. Gosh, I don't know where my friend could be, I mutter finally. Don't know what could have happened to him. I, smiling, mumble. With a brief smile, cursory, then deadpan, she speaks, with a faint burr of the Muttersprache, the barest trace of Teutonic thickness between the syllables, rendering each word its due. I think you'd better let me go now. I hesitated. I dropped my hand. I let her descend. I was left with her voice, with its echoes. And even now when I read her books, or those she celebrated, I remember the steady eyes beneath the shawl, and the iron burr in the voice, in its demand for freedom. Hannah, above me on the steep path, 217, Eros, builder of cities. Our Hannah's the dowager queen of her noble race, momentarily here, the last of her long line. And I wonder what shipwright shaped her, acute triangle, forehead, nose, brow, flaring at the head, slicing through the undulant waves of 1,000 generations, under the hand at heel, and the arrow before us at evening, homeward, like a fine glove, like statuary, like a figurehead wave-worn, honed by Sargassos, shaped, sharpened to such a keen point, surely as a quill, as the tip of an arrow, by the caress of that hand, and by its dream of a city, of an excess of eros overflowing in tenderness. Something in that aquiline wedge has partaken of us in transit. It feels almost fragile now, as a human skull, as the hand of a Horowitz, braced before Beethoven. It points us on gravely, asks us to go on. At the top of the path, looks back tenderly, the sharp skull pointing for the round one, our many-directioned quiver, with its billion darts, some poison, up the millennia, saying as she turns her head, "Thanks, Master," returning thanks, but with one grave demand, never to stop. 2:17. You'd better let me go now. 17 years it took to flush that moment out of my forest, but in the end it was mine. I was the hunter, I was the quarry, and she was free. She was my pointer, though, with her steady aim, standing in her faded silk shawl at the top of the hill. Her namesake Hannah helped too, a little, making place in my living room for her name. But we're all a part of the hunt, the quarry and the hunters, and we lie in wait, while over us the moments fly, and under us the moments creep, and between us the moments steal through the dense, pathless lifetimes. Confidential, 2:17, for a training manual. On the tactics and strategy of Hannah, my battered lassie, aging veteran and partisan of better homes and gardens, surely, to achieve at-rest position from standing position. 1. Advancing cautiously with most sophisticated sensors, conducts extensive aerial and ground reconnaissance. 2. Determines approximate location of prospective landing site A, diving platform, and launch pad downward. 3. Describes wide circumference about aforesaid site A, narrows it sedately, next circling continually, leans inward tentatively toward A, center of gravity, respectfully, reluctantly, yet with utmost gravity, lowering her wide amidships, easing downward by degrees. Kerplunk. Golf to Marlia, 2:19. There's been a lot of rain here. I was gathering firewood yesterday with Hannah, my new old collie, who's about 15 and snores, and we poked first my walking stick and then our heads down through the brown dead leaf floor into a tiny cave, and heard, far beneath, the flow of water rushing on, down to the Tennessee, the Mississippi, and the Gulf, and on. Doggone. 2:22. Her front legs locked like a mule, our Hannah, stares motionless down, her noble nose skull tapered, twitching at the tip, upon ethoxygen, ethylene diamine, hydriodide, choline chloride, dimethionine, paradoxine, hydrochloride, xanthan gum, and cereals, distillers, dried solubles. After 1,000 centuries of red-blooded breakfasts on the bones of Europe, and 2 or so on Little Walker, on the scraps of pork chops, in muttering dog monologue, Wohin, dog gone, whar's the ham bone gone, this ain't what I grew up on. Wintergreens, to Bob in L.A., 2/22. Bob, I'm going to harvest my winter crop of turnips for you. Here 'tis. It's a root crop, but the greens is also good, and caught what sun there was, I hope. And I reckon they photosyn the size pretty well. And brother, I took some very hard rolls with them, when the sky lay heavy on the mercury, and the spring froze solid, and the garden buckled up, and the white frost crackled on the windows, and made it dark inside. They kept on a-pushin' and poked through the crust from 45 below, from the dark rooms below. They cocked their lean, hungry shutters against the sky, wide open from the roots, and took what they could. And I hope they can hold it to California. 2:22, 8 p.m. Besides, these were not poems, but entries, my vestibules into time's passage, into my sense of nightfall, behind persons and things, behind the dark mountains in the afternoon, and the mountain people. Appalachian Fall. So as each fall moment came at its appointed time and passed, I tried to make its passage into an entry, a threshold with a luminous frame about a face, about some moving one, passing through it as it passed, bearing the solitude a little farther, into the invisible, interior, for which she was my entry. 2:22, 11 p.m. That the words and the life are coeval, native to the same place, that the search proceeds for the first country, the natal foundations, for that common level beneath words and the life, where they combine into a call, addressed to some dread someone, or to everyone. 2. Beulah tells me that on that level we cannot know very much. We can only be. And yet that's hardest of all, to be faithful to the search, to absorb the searching into the lifetime. 3. What is the lifetime but the space we can see, encrypted by those tracks which disappear into the trackless fields? Long trains of unknown ones traverse on their way toward those who labor beyond us at the end of their supplies. 4. These trains cannot be broken in our separations They remain unbroken for the others who pass the night there, whose dreams restore us when we sustain them. Davor das Fremde, des Gast du hier bist. 5. Now I've tried to say what the lifetime is. What is the living? But the power to pass through transitions, each more strange, when each stage is a link in the journey which connects the life, and a crossing where the tracks grow denser that pass through our own. 6. I recognize my dogwood now, transplanted 3 springs ago in the south window. I found her in loamy deep woods, lost in the gloomiest hollow, overshadowed by oaks. Every branch dove, leaping, writhing and twisting, over and under the others. My sapling was never a ballet. She was the prima and her Mikhail, locked together in a frenzy. But after a summer in the sun, she'd thrust a single stem from the center of the earth, straight up toward her apogee, midsummer noon. This then became the trunk, and shaded the others out in all their bewildering intricacy, kinesis and ravelment. And as they withered, I mourned them, thinking such miracle of shape came wholly from its struggle with shade. The mystery went all out of her when the struggle ceased. I could not make her my own. I could not bring her to light, being untranslatable, whose guest I am here. Of the long trains, undated early March, into the trackless fields toward where they're delivered. The point of the caravan presses over, pursued, pushed on, and replaced by one more radiant, denser with the promise, charged with it and with the passage, and so passes. The song, the word, the color, the life cannot stay. It exists only in this movement, this exiting, sic transit, leaving no trace. But in recollection it's not alone, but sent there, sent for and seeking, not only the transport to death and release from it in death, but to deliver it to those others unknown, bound with it, who labor there, cut off from their supplies. And that image led to the thought, in part, with others, was going there, and goes on, because the caravan's en route, because it is moving somewhere, not only in desire, drawn to death in love, but toward an end beyond it, because they exist with it, because it's bound not only toward them, but with them, because their labors restore it also, as theirs restore me. So as I thought of the long trains passing over into the desert, I was also thinking, listening to the locomotives in Bristol hauling coal after midnight, patiently back and forth across State Street, prepared me for these trains and for the thought of the labors at large in the atmosphere, like vibrations descending toward silence and into it on the plank floors of the hill town, and of my dad humming, crossing State Street at daybreak down Pennsylvania, under the rooms, between states, under the voices, under the colors, inexhaustible, pressing into them, pouring out of them, passing. Color after color, song after song, word after word, letter by letter by letter by letter by letter, and of the work at large, dispersed, the transports which labor through the self and consume the unknown ones bound with it. For the kindling, the flickering, long-burning fuels, the light of the torches and songs, the hues and the breeze and the colors flapping over the procession. But the image is getting away from me, and the thought. And again, my friendly interlocutor. What are you searching for, Prester Jack? Reinforcement yourself, resupply, to be sustained in this madness? Sanction and continuity for your fragments? To believe in some voice, in some vision which persists as a warrant for your puny one? Yes, our advocate replies, our public defender. Simone in the harbor, Marseille, 1940. We. And we bear the echo, the part of it we can, though no one can bear it all, and though it bears us down, and though it burns, and though we crawl and straggle to the pool's edge, to the last breath and fail, and dive into the sand, though we die to live. Spoons, 3/6. Fiddling with the dial, I tuned in on this. 5 Polish composers on PBS. And midway through the Ludoslavsky piece, I knew it contained a message for me, that something in it was so moving. It stopped for a moment at my side and waited for me to go on. Then, a moment later, festive and ominous as a squad, with banners and pennons at the head of an army far back in the suburbs, bearing its terrible colors into the city, surrendered. The Goretsky piece, referend, stopped also, marking time in rigid formation to the inexorable columns advancing behind it, on all roads, from everywhere, saying, "We accept you, even your troubled mind, in the time we keep." But what struck me was the whole tape, its collective import, as if the 5 composers, poles apart, had all been working together in ways unknown to any one, on an experiment in 5 movements, the work in progress of a people whose dreams are arrested because they are troubled, manacled in separate cells by the collectivity they menace, and who've dug in deeper to release them, as if defeated by the walls, They've attacked the floor, digging in with fingers and spoons, and honeycombed it with art, patiently, sorrowful, fearful, in the shackles of boredom, with laughter, developing until they detect, in the wide floor under the rooms, as they tap it together, beneath the tapping, a network of music, a réseau de résistance, more intricate, riddled, and denser than the cell block on the surface, undermining it slowly, because the music resisted and kept probing deeper, and its motives intact, on that lower level where the life is still possible, and contact with it, beneath the walls, between the cells, maintained, in that throbbing maze on which it depends, where the vibrations develop which move the earth, sounding it as they tap, the sense of oppression, the sense of wonder, the sense of danger, the sense of humor, the sense of an end impending with a malevolent force, so as to convey through the music, by refusing submission to the forces of death and the surface forces, so as to return to me what I knew in childhood, prayer, and some increment of power and urgency which is lacking with us. Tulip 3:9. I stumbled out the door before I wrote this, and saw, on the frost-cracked ground, the first spring flower, a dwarf tulip, spreading her petals barely above the ground. All bathed in frost, she was so brief, so vivid, sudden, so open. It was heartbreaking almost to look right down into her with the sun at noon. Her orange and golden anthers raised on their gossamer stalks cast almost no shadow within the bright circle of white-veined purple petals, with their sprinkling of orange anther dust, flecked with tiny motes of gold. Oh, she looked like a lidless eye, wide open after her sleep of death and some long, chilling dreams, looking up from the gray-brown field with an utter trust or abandon, or for rescue, or in gratitude for the afternoon of her life. Friendly again, 3:10. Apavarka, fulfillment, the completion of an action. Why am I never done? Why is it never over? Is it that you found the two properties to be one, to be inexpressible, to be inexhaustible? Did you seek completion, or these two mystic properties, to find them like a fountain which falls as it rises on its fall? Doctor will never say it, but will die trying. Depot 3:10. Maybe it comes down to this. What would you want the most in your heart of hearts to leave in the inheritance, if it meant life or death, and not your life only? Would you leave your will to the unknown ones, one drop more in the pool of motive power, for the long trains on their way into the desert? If you could find the depot, the collecting point, what would you deposit forever? Twang, 3:10. My words, they'd practice your heart, pluck every string. Then they'd wait for the far-off twang in the dark space upstairs. After the keyboards closed, the music put away, stowed under the seat. Through bedroom and den, the whole house and garden. Not to forget the small clang, trembling, shut, in the quiet cabinets, in the pegs and quills. Whatever's held over will be mine also, my lover. Stacks, 3:10. And I want it to add up to something, to a whole collection. An intelligence gathering, say, the G1 file of the network of my réseau de résistance, which collected its data in secret, in fields behind the lines, towns, countries apart, and which in consequence none of its agents can reveal, but which, one may hope, they've begun craftily to leak. But I feel like this recon patrol, after hacking through the boondocks, having suffered considerable attrition, down to one, sent out long ago from the city by this putative Grand Army Command in this remote, highly disreputable war, possibly long lost and probably forgotten, and which, conceivably group, perhaps army, assuredly battalion, and certainly squad, is now led by this green and indubitably long-lost cavalry corporal, who just wants to know why, where, and what the hell he's riding his little mule out there along this outback into this dry gulch for, and where the fuck is Dale, and what's going on back at Division, by the way. But he can't even contact his platoon sergeant. Or maybe it's more like this research project, pursued beyond the pale, in the palest folios, below in the sub-basements, down in the yellowest stacks, between the withered juvenilia, moldering current romances, composting poetry manuscripts, shredding machines, and emergency toilet paper bins under the gentlemen's, where the thick black Gothic characters come apart on contact, stick to your fingers, or drip onto the gravel of the drain field at the end of memoirs. Or maybe the search is just for that level, and for those who've had some inkling of what I mean by this, as well as for some inklings of my own, which might make sense of some items in the carols beyond recall. The despairs even in laughter, and reach with them out toward them, toward my siblings down there in the stacks, or out there on that outback without a radio. Dust, 3:13. And Carla said before she left, and furthermore, why the heck don't you sweep this place out at least once a year? I can't even scream in here, choked up in this cussed dust. Well, I said, I kind of like this dust. It's a pretty good symbol. Now, I think we ought to keep this symbol around and protect it as carefully as we possibly can. The energy in this symbol is priceless. There aren't many symbols left for us poets. Maybe this is the very wasteland and source of that anxiety you're always talking about. Please note how it covers everything indiscriminately, like the light, like the dark, like rain, like time, like death, like fall, like fear spreading over the garrison city, like the snow softly falling all over Ireland, etc. See, it's invisible, except when you draw back this curtain. A shaft of sun cuts through it, or a jet scream out of nowhere. Then every flex revealed is what it is. Heck, I collect the dust. I'm an aficionado of the dust. I love my symbol. And look, I just swept this whole cabin clean out last month. And here, regard these notebooks, these 4 quartets. Look at this Chomsky, this Rilke. And what's this? I can't read this title. This is The Decline of the West, wife. It's verifiable. It's a disease. It's what's wrong with us. It's a brooding, malefic force, atmospheric, from Murphy to Moscow. You can't fight it. This is not the dust, it's the dust. It's the dust. There's always a couple more handfuls around somewhere. The old broom just raises it up to the history books and surveys of philosophy on the top shelf. But it settles back down overnight, down into Freud on dreams, down into music, collects itself and says, "Come here, cabin mate, go get the broom. Open up your hand, I'll teach you how it feels. Pilot, I'll show you fear. Every teaspoon in the drain rack, hair of head and palm of hand, holds a little each of your mortal share." Reading Birksall, 3:14. Among other things, hysteria teaches laughter and terror are not so separate, or laughter and folly, laughter and cruelty, terror and cruelty, folly and tenderness. Things that don't appear to make any sense together. Laughter may connect, and laughter may flow between us and through us in our contradictions. Philosophers say the symbol is a bridge. Well, laughter may be too, when we run out of symbols. Laughter may be a bond, and laughter may release us into that bondage that we can bear. Okay, preachers, 3:14. I'll be the owl, and my eyes'll be the 2 offering plates cupped for the change, and my thoughts'll be the 2 threadbare deacons passing them down the long aisle. dolefully expectant, hands folded over their crotches, pretending they're not a bit concerned about that luscious blonde knockout halfway down on the right beside the bank president with the big fat envelope poised above the plate, wobbling along, dipping into the snotty fist of that tenderfoot with the penny on the other side of the aisle. Buck Private, 314. I feel like this Buck Private, fresh out of boot camp, on his first recon patrol into enemy territory. Meanwhile, the mess hall, command post, and possibly the whole fucking battalion's completely wiped out, and he's lost radio contact with regiment, division, army, and army group. Alpha here, over. White noise. Alpha here, over. White noise. Has command changed hands back there? Have they all left the country? Is the whole war lost, and the peace treaty signed, and the enemy and friendly forces combined to flush out a few cut-off remnants still fighting it out way back yonder? Here. Free associations, 315. Associations, collection, plate, tithe, offering, collecting point, stores, reserves, recollection, pool, my two deacons. Durham, Inglewood Avenue, typewriter on lapboard, associating freely, just looking at the clear window, reflecting the room behind me, until I look through it, onto the street in 1959, and the room becomes a membrane, penetrated by light. Light collects on the concrete between the curbs. A pool of it spills over into Mrs. Glimp's garden, sprinkling her mild yellow squash blooms in their cumbrous green bathrobes, plumply fanning themselves in their pews, drying out toward noon. From up the block, sparkling in the lot vacant last week, on hard hats, hammerheads, saws flashing. A few words collect on the page now. From where do they come? Nowhere I know. A few more collect on the hats, on the cement in the street, red clay, a weed-choked field, house roofs. Associations pool, pool wet, pool clear, pool splash, pool snorkel, pool picnic, pool tomato, pool blue, pool bikini, pool breasts, pool nipples, okay, pool chlorine, pool car, pool highway, pool Buick, pool Elk City, pool Purina. No, Jack, not that way. Try again, James. Pool surface, pool depth, pool bathe, pool ablution, pool gene, pool descent, pool memory, pool together, pool dive, pool go down, pool go on, God equal X, Y, an old dive downtown, off CD State Street. Words found on a piece of scrap paper. Surface, depth, persona, Atman, something forgotten, not only by us, but by mankind as a whole. Recollection is God. Before us the stranger, whose guests we are here. White as the snow outside, the space between surface and depth, persona and Atman. They go outside, into the snow, into the depth beneath persona, into the pool, alone. Why is it always forgotten? Because it includes the living, and so must be relived, to be remembered. To remember it then is to revive, to recall it from the pool, to draw on it, to draw it up, to draw it together, to surface it in someone, clawing for breath, alone, after the plunge, among the strange divers in the pool, to raise it by slow degrees into the atmosphere, into the temperature of our city, Omega, to fuse them, the mortal and passing, and the deathless and constant, the eternal load passed on in passing only. Oh, let it mount on the death-ridden souls for the ride home, and let it be their import that my words bear in part, as part of the burden of the passage of the long trains on their way. Last letter to Alex, after a word from him, after long silence, on the music of John Coltrane and Thelonious Monk, whose funeral he'd attended. 3:17. Your letter made me feel like a bee-ball and a space probe rolled into one. I took one step at the mailbox, flipped, and landed on both feet at the cabin door, blew on, and dribbled about 15 feet off the tin roof for a while, soloed between the dwarf purple tulips and the first plum blossoms, and on to the moon, up to Venus, Sagittarius, and on. And now in the morning, I feel like I've danced all night with the souls of John Coltrane and Thelonious Monk, thankful to the night, for the moon, for every star, and my son.